July 14th, 1789. The Bastille prison is stormed, igniting a revolution that will engulf France in brutal wars over the next 20 years and will give rise to the greatest general to ever live, Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon's first high command was at the siege of Toulon. There he was put in charge of the army's artillery and had greatly contributed to the stunning victory. After a brief period in jail because of his political connections, he had returned to Paris. While in Paris, a royalist mob had stormed the National Assembly. Being the only high-ranking officer in Paris, he was tasked with putting down the mob, a job he did with great efficiency. Because he had saved the government, Napoleon was rewarded with command of the Army of the Interior. But in 1796, Napoleon was given command of the depleted Army of Italy. In just 2 weeks, he defeated Piedmontese forces, and in 1 year, he brought the Austrians to their knees, forcing them to sign a peace treaty that ended the War of the First Coalition. In 1798, Napoleon was given command of the Army of Egypt in an attempt to disrupt British trade in the Mediterranean. After he abandoned his army in Egypt, he launched a coup and made himself the first consul of France. In 1800, the Austrians attacked him once more, and he launched his army across the Alps and defeated them at the stunning Battle of Marengo with help from General Desaix. Then, in 1804, he proclaimed himself Emperor of France. Once more, the powers of Europe declared war against France, and once more he defeated them in his most brilliant campaign. In 1806, the Prussians declared war on France and were swiftly defeated at Jena. After he defeated the Prussians, he turned his attention to the Russians in Poland. Harsh winter campaigning culminated in the bloody Battle of Eylau that ended in a French victory. In 1807, he had finally finished the War of the Fourth Coalition after a stunning victory against the Russian forces at Friedland. Then, in 1809, the Austrians had once more declared war on France, and the French eventually defeated the Austrians at Wagram. After the destruction of his army in Russia, he had fought for 2 more years against the coalition, but was forced to abdicate in 1814. Then, in 1815, he returned to France, but was defeated at Waterloo. Napoleon finally met his end on the island of St. Helena in 1821. The management of Napoleon's army was divided into 3 divisions. The first of these divisions was the Maison Saville. The Maison Saville was responsible for Napoleon's coach, camp, and supplies such as pens, paper, and maps. The second was the Grand Écuyer. The Grand Écuyer was responsible for the procuring of horses for Napoleon and the army. The military was further divided into 4 sections. The first was the Secretariat, made up of secretaries and administrators of the French government. The second was responsible for gathering intelligence from spies, reports, and enemy prisoners and compiling them into concise reports. The third was responsible for creating maps for Napoleon and his generals. The Major Général was divided into 3 divisions or more if necessary. These included army communications and officer assignments, supply lines and army headquarters and recruitment, prisoners of war and deserters. Other smaller departments included garrisons and preparing detailed reports for Napoleon if needed. This system worked wonders for Napoleon throughout his 20-year reign, and when it became mismanaged by Marshal Soult, it led to devastating casualties and a defeat at the Battle of Waterloo. In 1805, the powers of Europe declared war on France, all except Prussia. In the early days of the war, General Mack had advanced his army too far into Bavaria, cutting him off from reinforcement. Napoleon leapt at the opportunity and marched all the way to Bavaria. Napoleon then proceeded to encircle Mack. with Marshal Murat and part of Lannes' corps distracting him in the east, while Marshals Ney, Soult, Davout, Marmont, and Bernadotte swung around Mac's flank. What ended was a humiliating defeat for the Austrians. His first initial victory in the war eventually led to an even greater victory at Austria, where he brought an end to the War of the Third Coalition. To win the battle, Napoleon needed to know the location of his enemy and his own forces. Well-drafted orders were needed to keep his army close enough together so they, in turn, could not be cut off, and far away enough that they could move quickly. Only by complicated and well-organized staff work was Napoleon able to win, of which only Napoleon and his chief of staff, Marshal Berthier, could perform. Napoleon organized his army using the corps system. The corps system broke an army down into several mini-armies, consisting of cavalry, artillery, infantry, and engineers. The army shown here was used in the 1805 Ulm and Austerlitz campaign. As you could see, 1st Corps is commanded by Marshal Bernadotte and consists of 17,000 soldiers. The 2nd Corps was commanded by General Marmont, consisting of 20,000 soldiers. The 3rd Corps was commanded by Marshal Davout, consisting of 26,000 soldiers. The 4th Corps was commanded by Marshal Soult, consisting of 40,000 soldiers. The 5th Corps was commanded by Marshal Lannes, commanding 18,000 soldiers. The 6th Corps was commanded by Ney, consisting of 24,000 soldiers. The 7th Corps was commanded by Augereau, consisting of 14,000 soldiers, and the cavalry reserve was commanded by Murat, consisting of 22,000 men. The Imperial Guard was commanded by General Bessier. The Imperial Guard was the most elite unit of the empire. In total, 26 marshals were named throughout the empire's history. A marshal would usually command a corps and was the highest military rank aside from the emperor. The composition of every corps included at least 3 infantry divisions. Each infantry division was broken down into 2 brigades. A brigade consisted of 4 regiments, and a regiment further consisted of 3 to 6 battalions, and a battalion would have 4 to 6 companies. A company would usually consist of about 50 men. And there was also reserve artillery and a cavalry brigade. Now this example shows Davout's 3rd Corps in the 1806 campaign, in which he had 26 pieces of reserve artillery, over 40 in total, and he had 3 brigades, or 3 regiments, of chasseurs à cheval. In 1806, Russia, joined by Prussia, declared war on France once more. Napoleon immediately marches to meet them, crossing a thick forest and finding what he believes to be the main Prussian army. He sends Davout north with the corps composition explained in the last slide, along with Bernadotte's corps. All the while, he engages the Prussian army head-on. Napoleon successfully engages and crushes the Prussian army he is facing, but Davout is facing a much stronger army, with no help from Napoleon or Bernadotte. He calmly forms his line and defends against the uncoordinated Prussian assaults and leads a successful counterattack against them, winning an unlikely victory. Because of the composition of Davout's corps, he was able to keep his lines together with infantry and artillery, while cavalry pursued the fleeing Prussians. If he had been stranded with only infantry, artillery would blast him to pieces unchallenged by other pieces of artillery or cavalry. With no artillery, his counterattack would have been stopped in its tracks, and with no cavalry, the enemy would slip away unpursued. Because of Davout's tactical prowess in the corps system, Davout and Napoleon crushed the Prussians. A week later, the French occupied Berlin, and 6 months later, Napoleon ended the war. Organization and management, while extremely important, are not the only things an army needs to succeed. The tactics of the French army were simple and effective. The first tactic I would like to draw to your attention is the concentration of artillery, a tactic Napoleon used in almost all of his battles. The tactic states you should concentrate fire on one position of an enemy, demoralizing and weakening them. Then you follow with a charge against the weakened enemy. After that position falls, the enemy will be panicked and hopefully their retreat will be cut off and they will surrender or retreat in disarray after a swift attack. In addition to concentrated artillery fire, the French army effectively used skirmishers. Skirmishers were soldiers with light equipment that would fight spread out and individually fire and then take cover. Sometimes called light infantry, skirmishers were extremely useful in combat. The French used skirmishers to disguise their massing forces and to cause disarray in the enemy ranks. After the skirmishers were driven out by the enemy, the French would send huge columns of soldiers forward in a massive charge, hopefully crushing the enemy. In 1809, the Austrians went to war with the French once more. Their new commander, Archduke Charles, would be one of Napoleon's most competent enemies. Charles had remained the Austrian army after Napoleon's example, implementing the corps system. Charles fought well and aggressively in the opening maneuvers of the campaign, but was pushed back across the Danube River after the Battle of Egmont. At first, Napoleon was pushed back and unable to follow Charles across the Danube, but he went to attack again, this time much more successfully. He had managed to push the Austrians back to their defensive positions at Wagram and across the river. The following day, Napoleon commenced his attack with a massive barrage of artillery fire, using 122 cannons in a single battery. After weakening the Austrians, he had led a huge attack, using Davout to flank their positions, and the future Marshal MacDonald won a claim after forming a huge open-back square and charging the Austrians in front of him. Wagram was just one of the battles Napoleon used massed artillery fire to signal the beginning of an attack and win a stunning victory. Without the use of mass artillery, Napoleon would be unable to weaken the Austrian positions, and his attack would probably have fallen flat.